Emily Walker had barely stepped into Timberjack's when a crude, booming laugh cracked through the room, loud enough to make the entire bar pause for half a second. Then a voice sliced through the air like a blade. "Look at that, another easy target." That single moment marked the beginning of a night no one in the Little Red Rock bar could possibly have predicted. The night an ordinary-looking woman would force an entire town to reconsider how they judged people. Late afternoon light filtered through the dusty, thick window pane, scattering uneven patches across the dark wooden tables and giving the place a worn, tired feel. Timberjack's was where exhausted lumber mill workers came to chase off the day's grit with a bit of alcohol. But to Emily, 38 years old, a former Delta Force operative who had survived some of the darkest battlefields in the Middle East, this place was nothing more than a quiet corner to breathe after a long day at the Veterans Center. She walked in without any intention of drawing attention, and just as firmly without allowing anyone to intrude on the personal boundaries sharpened by years of survival. Her thick brown jacket hugged her solid frame as she pulled a stool at the bar. Under the weak golden light, her black hair tied back neatly exposed a thin scar along her collarbone, a silent reminder of a classified mission in Basra that no one in Red Rock had ever heard of. To the townspeople, Emily was simply a woman living alone, in a quiet house, a few miles outside town, ordinary, harmless, not worth noticing. The truth was the exact opposite. Bartender Dave, 50 years old, a man who understood far more than he ever said, greeted her with a knowing look. He nodded, poured her a glass of whiskey that shone amber like the fading sunset outside. "You look tired today," he murmured low enough to stay out of reach of the rowdy men behind them. Emily allowed only a slight curve at her lips. "Long day," she replied, her eyes still tracking the room through the reflection in the mirror behind the liquor shelves. That was when the bar door flew open with a heavy kick, slamming into the wall like a silent warning. 5 men walked in black leather jackets, a faded white wolf emblem. Ridge Wolves Motorcycle Club. No one dared look directly, and it did not take much imagination to know who the leader was. Darren Bear Larkin, 42 years old, towering build, shoulders wide like a barn door, sun-darkened skin, erratic tattoos, and eyes sharp as a blade. A man who used his fists as law. Bear spotted Emily instantly. She sat still quiet, almost blending into the shadows around her. That only drew him in further. A lone woman. No group, no protection, no one to intervene. To Bear, she looked like opportunity entertainment. He walked toward her, each metal-tipped step on the wooden floor thudding like a drum, signaling an approaching storm. His men fanned out behind him in a loose semicircle. Emily remained seated, lifting her whiskey to her lips with a calm that bordered on unsettling. That calmness irritated Bear, made him feel challenged, even though no one had spoken. New around here, he growled from behind her, his breath thick with beer, "Or just a lost little thing, hoping I'll show you the way." He raised his voice intentionally, performing the routine he had perfected, provoke, humiliate, crush someone's peace, and laugh at the fear he created. Emily did not turn. She set her glass down so softly it barely made a sound. In her eyes, Bear was just another type she had seen countless times, men who mistook brute strength for real power, unaware there existed forms of power far more dangerous. Bear stepped closer. His hand landed on the bar beside her back, boxing her in, forcing a reaction. The whole bar held its breath. No one interfered. No one dared stare too long. What happened next was something no one in Timberjack's could have predicted. Bear smirked, preparing another vulgar line, but before the words left his mouth, Emily turned her head just slightly enough for him to see her eyes dark, steady, cold, like the deepest corner of a battlefield where death watched every step. In those eyes was something that made a man like Bear, a man who had once knocked out 3 people for looking at him the wrong way, feel a primal threat he could not name. He did not understand why his breath caught for a fraction of a second, why his chest tightened as if facing a predator. But the more perceptive customers understood something Bear did not. He had just crossed the wrong person. Someone Red Rock had never truly known but would soon learn to respect or to fear. Bear only understood one thing: those eyes did not belong to an ordinary woman, and every mistake he made that night began in the moment he should have walked away, but chose not to. Bear had no time to understand why his heartbeat stuttered before his old instincts surged back, sweeping away every silent warning in his mind. He leaned closer to Emily, trying to reassert dominance, the same way he always did with those he believed weaker than himself. "You think looking at me like that is going to scare me?" he growled, shaping each word as a threat. What he did not know was that every movement he made, from his breathing to the placement of his feet to the tension in his shoulders, was being studied by Emily as if he were nothing more than an equation she had solved 100 times. Emily set her glass down, not fast, not slow, simply marking the end of her remaining patience. Dave exhaled sharply, behind the counter, recognizing danger in the air, yet unable to stop it. The older patrons had already turned away, pretending to focus on their beer bottles, just as they always did when avoiding trouble with the Ridge Wolves. No one wanted to cross Bear. He was the kind of man who would smash a table to prove a point no one had asked him to make. The scene was all too familiar: a large, violent man and a lone woman, a dynamic that had replayed countless times in this town. But tonight, everything was different. Tonight, that woman was not someone for Bear to humiliate. She was a lesson, and he was about to be the one learning. He reached out his hand, broad as a slab of timber touching Emily's waist, with a gesture half mocking and half provoking. For a moment, the only sound in the bar was the uneven footsteps of a drunk near the far wall. Then a sharp slap cut through the air. Bear had struck Emily hard, the impact echoing like a blow to the bar's collective pride. A few onlookers laughed crudely, laughter distorted, graceless, yet enough for Bear to feel he had won. Emily merely shifted with the force, but her expression, or rather the absence of one, was what froze the room. No anger, no fear, no recoil. Only a heavy stillness like the surface of water seconds before a storm tears it apart. Bear turned to show off to his crew, raising his hand in a crude celebration, as if he had scored a point in some pitiful game. He laughed, convinced the night was his to control. He was wrong. Emily rose so quietly, no one even noticed the moment she moved. Only when her compact frame shifted fully did the people around her sense the air tightening. Before Bear could turn back, his wrist was locked in an unbreakable grip. A single movement, clean, precise, leaving no room for resistance. Emily pivoted and twisted his wrist into an angle no amount of muscle could counter. It was not strength, but finely honed technique, the kind forged in years. Bear could not even imagine. A sharp crack of strained bone filled the space. Bear released a short guttural sound of pain, involuntary and raw. The bikers behind him froze. They had no idea what had just happened. 1 second, their leader was grinning triumphantly. The next, he was dropping to his knees like a wild animal whose fiercest instinct had been snapped in half. Emily leaned close enough for her breath to brush his ear, her tone steady and quiet, yet edged like steel. "If you touch me again, you will not be using this wrist." No one in the bar laughed now. No one even breathed too loudly. And in that suffocating silence, with his knees pressed to the cold wooden floor, Bear finally saw the truth. He never wanted to acknowledge the woman before him, did not belong to the small world he ruled through fear. She belonged to another realm entirely, one where power was not measured in shouts, but in deadly precision, where calmness was far more terrifying than violence. Emily released him, letting his weight collapse to the floor like a heavy bag of meat. He struggled to stand, eyes bloodshot, mouth twitching with humiliation and fury. But Emily had already turned away, as if defeating him was too insignificant to remember. Everyone in the bar knew Bear would never let this go. Yet in the same moment, they all understood something far more important. The person Bear thought was prey was in fact a different kind of predator, one far more dangerous, far more controlled, and fully prepared to fight to the end if pushed. And Bear's greatest mistake was not the slap. It was choosing Emily Walker as the target of his pride, a choice that would force the entire town of Red Rock to pay the price. Bear pushed himself upright, his face twisted partly from pain and partly from humiliation. Yet what choked him most was not the wrist lock, but the way Emily turned her back on him, as if he had never mattered enough to be considered an opponent. A man like Bear was not used to being ignored, and that disregard cut deeper than any blow. Emily sat down again, lifted her whiskey, and drank as though no commotion had happened at all. That quiet, unshaken gesture brought absolute silence over Timberjacks. The same men who used to brag loudly about the fights of their youth now only dared to glance sideways. Dave quietly set extra towels behind the counter, his hand trembling, because he knew the night would not end peacefully. Bear retreated toward his table, his wrist already darkening, his breath uneven. His crew avoided his eyes, too afraid to laugh and too afraid to ask. But, in their minds, the truth he most wanted to bury was already carved in stone. He had just been taken down by someone he never thought worth a second look. And that simmering humiliation, like embers hidden under ash, was the very thing that would ignite everything that followed. Emily remained seated, her gaze resting on the worn wooden surface of the bar, though her mind had long left Timberjacks. The scattered laughs, Bear's frustrated grunts, the scrape of chairs behind her, she registered each sound for a brief moment before all of it disappeared beneath the steel discipline she had carried for years. After so many deployments, Emily knew this sensation too well the moment when danger crept closer, yet fear no longer had the power to move her. She finished her drink, letting the warmth slide down her throat, then stood. Dave met her eyes, his expression filled with worry and an unspoken warning. Emily gave the slightest nod, a quiet assurance that she was prepared for whatever came next. Stepping out of the bar, her shadow stretched across the uneven pavement under the dim yellow streetlights. The Montana wind blew cold against her collar. Her mind was unusually calm, her body sliding into the heightened awareness she had lived in for years. No panic, no rush, only focus. She knew Bear would not let this go. Men like him never allowed anyone to bruise their pride. But Emily also understood something else. The man who had touched her tonight had no idea he had just stepped into a swamp, and he would be the one sinking. She locked her car and slipped into the driver's seat of the old sedan that had stayed with her since she left the military. The steady hum of the engine soothed her as she took a slow breath. The road home was quiet, lined with still trees under the scattered glow of street lamps, their shadows stretching long over the dark asphalt. She drove through the Red Rock neighborhood where small two-story houses sat close together like a peaceful painting she once chose as her place to rebuild her life. The scent of pine and the crisp night air offered a fragile sense of safety, a safety she knew would not survive this night. When she turned onto her street, she immediately noticed the unnatural reflection on the garage door. A streak of red, glistening like blood, sliding down a white wall. Her heartbeat did not speed up. It simply tightened once, sharply. She turned off the engine and sat still for a few seconds, scanning through the windshield. No sound, no movement. But the message was unmistakable. "You are next." The red paint was still wet, its droplets crawling down the door like trails of bleeding rust. Emily stepped out of the car, her posture steady, her silhouette, revealing every year of combat experience etched into her stance. Her eyes swept the yard, the fence line, the distant bushes. Everything was too quiet. Footprints, cigarette ash, fresh tire tracks, the sharp smell of paint carried in the wind. Emily did not need anyone to explain who left the message. They had followed her home, and that act spoke louder than any threat Bear could have shouted in the bar. In the field, the most dangerous enemies were never the strongest or the largest groups. They were the ones driven by personal motive. Bear now had a motive, and he would do anything to reclaim the honor he believed had been shattered. Emily stood before the garage door for a long moment as the wind picked up, swirling the faint yellow light into the drifting layers of mist. She inhaled deeply and exhaled slowly, touching the damaged wall with her fingertips. Cold, damp, rough. A silence spread around her, not the silence of fear, but of resolve. If Bear thought she would back down or hide or tremble in the dark, he had misjudged her completely. And in that moment, Emily understood that whatever lay ahead was no longer about a bar fight. It had become a battle Red Rock had never seen. And she, the woman everyone underestimated, would be the beginning of the storm about to sweep across the town. Emily stepped back one pace to take in the full view of the garage door once more. The blood-red letters stood out sharply against the clean white paint with streaks running down the cold concrete, like fingers desperate to hold on to life. The air carried the sharp sting of chemicals mixed with the chill of late night, making the scene even more unsettling. But what kept Emily still was not the message itself. It was the faint familiarity she sensed in the spray pattern. Chaotic yet furious raw instinct without skill. This was not a calculated threat. This was the reaction of someone humiliated beyond control. She inhaled deeply, pulling her mind back into its old mode, emotionless, analytical. And right then, a porch light flicked on at the neighbor's house. The small beam sliced through the darkness like scissors, cutting open the silence. A door swung open, and a concerned, elderly voice followed. "Emily. Are you all right?" Nora Peterson. Over 60 years old, wrapped in a cardigan, stepped onto her porch, with worry etched on her gentle face. She lived alone, but loneliness had never hardened her heart. If anything, it made her even more aware of anything unusual in the neighborhood. Emily turned her voice perfectly steady. "I am fine, Mrs. Nora. Just some kids messing around. Nothing serious." Nora frowned, her seasoned gaze landing squarely on the bright red words. "Kids did not write that, Emily," she said slowly, with absolute certainty. "Do you need to call the police?" The question hit like a needle right at the pressure point. Emily knew that calling the police would be nothing but a waste of time. Carl Hayes would not believe her. He might even laugh. Or worse, he could tip off Bear that she was scared. "No need, ma'am. I can handle it." Emily offered a small smile, one that always helped soothe the older woman. Nora nodded reluctantly, then went back inside, closing the door and leaving Emily alone with the night. As soon as the door shut, Emily's expression changed. Her eyes sharpened, turning cold as forged steel. Gone was the peaceful smile reserved for neighbors. What remained was the gaze of someone who once commanded special operations during missions the world would never hear about. That look said only one thing: she had identified the threat, and her mind had already begun counterattacking. Emily circled the yard, checking every detail. No unfamiliar footprints beneath the windows. No signs of forced entry. No unusual sounds inside the house. The doormat remained exactly where she placed it. The thin thread she had set in the doorframe as a simple but effective intrusion marker was still intact. No one had gone in. They only wanted to send a message. A wrong one. She turned toward the garage again. The letters were large, aggressive, poorly controlled. Bear wanted her frightened. All he did was remind her of a truth she lived by. Fear does not belong to the strong. It belongs to those pretending to be strong. Emily opened her car door, switched on the small interior light, and let it illuminate the keychain in her hand. Then she crouched near the bottom edge of the garage door, examining closely. A slight scuff on the concrete, the curved imprint of a heavy boot heel, the type worn by bikers. The length told her a large man made it, and the angle showed he had left in a hurry, not confident enough to stay and watch her reaction. She ran her fingers across the letters again. The paint was still damp. This meant they had left maybe 10 to 15 minutes earlier. Another mistake. If they thought she was asleep, if they thought she let her guard down, if they thought she would curl up in fear, then they knew nothing about someone who had survived by instinct for years, someone for whom every nighttime sound was a signal and every shift of wind was a warning. She was always alert. She was always ready. Emily wiped the paint from her fingertips onto her pants, as if brushing off meaningless dust. Then she went inside, closing the door so quietly it barely made a sound. The warm yellow light filled her neat, orderly home. Every item in place, reflecting the discipline of a lifetime in uniform. She walked to the kitchen, reaching for the small spot where she hid a particular key, the one that opened a wooden box in the bottom drawer. A flicker of emotion passed through her eyes when her fingers touched the box. Not fear, determination. Memories of the days she led elite soldiers when every decision she made could alter the fate of her entire team. She unlocked the box and looked at the silver and gold medals glinting under the kitchen light. Symbols of a past she had buried. But Bear had dug it up, not in the way he thought, but in the way that would cost him. Emily closed the box, carefully locked it, and leaned against the counter, her head bowed slightly. A slow breath in a slow breath out. Stillness. Yet deep in her mind, an old door had opened. A door to the version of herself that Red Rock had never seen. Bear thought he was threatening Emily. In reality, he had awakened a sleeping tiger, and when a tiger rises, mountains learn to tremble. Emily shut off every light in the house, letting the darkness swallow the rooms with deliberate intent. She needed the quiet, needed the space for her mind to reorganize each detail and every signal she had gathered. The sedan rested silently in the garage, and the street lamp's glow slipped through the window, casting a thin blade of light across the hood. Emily stood motionless in the living room for several seconds. Then she walked straight to the front door, locked it, checked the latch, checked the hinges, checked the gap at the threshold. Her body moved like a meticulously programmed machine, nothing wasted, nothing excessive. Every action was a survival habit carved into her from years of combat. Even so, despite surviving places 100 times more dangerous, Emily never dismissed a single sign. Not because she feared, because she understood that Bear was the kind of man who did not stop at the line he should. His ego was bigger than his massive frame, and she had shattered it in front of his men. A man like him, once humiliated, had only two paths: run or strike back until he destroyed himself. And Emily knew which one he would choose. She turned toward the kitchen, opened the faucet, and let the icy water run over her hands. The cold centered her mind. Bear was dangerous, but not dangerous in a smart way. His danger came from impulse emotion, alcohol, and wounded pride. That made him far more predictable than the people she once faced. The ones who knew how to be cruel without feeling anger, the ones who knew how to kill without a sound. Bear was not that, but his recklessness could sometimes be even harder to anticipate than calculation. A faint sound outside made Emily hold her breath for half a second. She shut off the water, tilted her head, listened. Wind. Just the wind brushing through the pines by the yard, but her awareness never drifted. In the quiet darkness, Bear's image rose sharply in her mind. The vile eyes, the thick stench of beer, the smug laughter. He thought she was weak. He thought she would shrink inside her thin jacket when threatened. But Emily knew exactly who she was. More importantly, she knew exactly who he was. She returned to the living room and sat in the old armchair, fingers interlocked. Her phone lay on the table. Emily considered calling the Veterans Center or calling Marcus or sending a message to the volunteer group. But she set the phone back down. Bringing others in now would only turn them into targets. Bear was not foolish enough to take on many people at once. He would come for her first, then go after whatever she cared about. That was how men like him worked hit the soft spot before hitting the deep one. Emily closed her eyes briefly, letting distant memories rush in. Long nights on deployment, the rumble of ammunition trucks' helicopter rotors, slicing through darkness raids, where a single mistimed breath decided everything. Those moments had exhausted her once. Tonight they gave her strength. Not everyone could turn a threat into fuel. But Emily could. Her phone buzzed gently. A message from the Veterans Center. Marcus had sent a photo of the coffee machine they repaired that morning. His note was simple. "It works perfectly now. Stop by tomorrow to check it." Emily stared at the message, and for a brief moment she could almost see Marcus's smile, honest, open, full of hope, the kind a young veteran was trying desperately to rebuild. Hope that Bear would not hesitate to crush. Emily rose resolve, bright in her eyes. She walked into the bedroom, opened the closet, and pulled out a metal box from the lowest shelf. She did not take a weapon. She did not need one. What she retrieved was a small, worn black notebook filled with tactical plans she had used, survival rules, notes on observation and response. Not because she had forgotten, but because looking at the notebook locked her mind into the state she needed: cold, precise, unyielding, decisive. As she read the lines she had written during long nights under a dim military tent, a single truth settled over her, one Bear knew nothing about. He was not facing Emily Walker, the single woman living in a wooden house. He was facing Emily Walker, former Delta Force commander who had led a team through ambushes where survival odds were less than 1 in 10. She closed the notebook, her eyes sharpening in the dark. 3 words formed clearly in her mind. Do not let them choose the battlefield. No. She would not wait for Bear to strike again. She would not wait for the Veterans Center to be threatened. She would not wait for Marcus or anyone else to be dragged in. Taking the initiative was always the advantage of those who had lived through war. Emily stepped to the window, and looked out at the empty street glowing under a lone street lamp. Red Rock was still sleeping, unaware that a storm was forming. And with a long, calm breath, Emily made the decision she had avoided for far too long. Tomorrow she would face the man everyone in town feared, Sheriff Carl Hayes. Not to ask for help, but to look him straight in the eyes, to learn exactly who stood behind Bear, and most of all to make Bear and the rotten system around him understand one truth. Emily Walker would not back down. Not ever. Emily woke before the sun had fully risen. The faint light slipping through the window cast soft, uncertain shapes across the wooden floor as if the whole town of Red Rock was still hesitating between night and day. But inside, Emily's hesitation no longer existed. She would confront Carl Hayes. She would look directly at the truth behind his face. No more guessing. No more waiting. Last night had given her enough data to know exactly which piece of the puzzle was out of place. And today, she would put it where it belonged. She washed her face with cold water, the sting sharpening her senses better than any amount of caffeine. When she looked in the mirror, the 38-year-old woman staring back at her showed no weakness. Sharp eyes, high cheekbones, a firm jaw. Someone war could not break someone who certainly would not be shaken by a few drunken bikers. She did not choose anything flashy to wear, just a pale blue shirt, dark jeans, a heavy jacket. But there was nothing ordinary about Emily. She stepped into the day the way she stepped into missions long ago, every stride steady, every breath slow and controlled. Her body remembered the rhythm of a time when every single action could mean life or death. The car door shut with a heavy, precise thud, breaking the silence of morning like the first period at the end of a verdict, still unwritten. The road to the sheriff's office was quieter than usual. 2-story wooden houses lay still beneath a thin veil of fog, with faint wisps of chimney smoke drifting from a few distant roofs. But Red Rock's peacefulness belonged only to those who had never caught Bear's attention. For Emily, that peace was nothing more than a thin sheet covering a rotting structure underneath, a sheet she intended to tear away today. When she parked in front of the station, she could feel the difference in the air. Not fear, not danger. It was the kind of corruption that hid behind an unnerving silence. The old red brick building stood there, not quite collapsing, but not truly functioning, either like a creature that had fallen asleep on its own power long ago. She pushed the door open. Inside, the pale neon lights made everything look colder. The young deputy at the front desk tapped a pencil, still fighting sleep. When he saw Emily, he flinched, then tried to cover it with stiff politeness. "Can I help you with something?" he asked, his shaky voice betraying the fact that he knew at least a little about what had happened the night before. "Is Sheriff Hayes here?" Emily asked, her voice calm, but leaving no room for refusal. Yes. But Emily did not wait for him to finish. She walked straight toward Hayes's office door. The deputy only managed a helpless sigh, but did not dare stop her. No one stopped someone who walked as if they had pushed through doors far heavier and far more dangerous. She knocked once. "I am busy," Hayes barked thick with irritation. Emily opened the door and stepped inside. The office smelled of stale cigarettes and day-old coffee. Hayes lounged in his wide leather chair, his stomach pushing awkwardly against his belt, his eyes fixed on her with a mix of annoyance and caution. He hated being interrupted. Even more, he hated women who were not afraid of him. Walker Hayes said her name like he was grinding something between his teeth. "What do you want this early in the morning?" "We need to talk about the people who vandalized my garage," Emily said, standing tall in front of his desk. She did not sit. She did not wait to be invited. Hayes snorted. "I told you already. Kids acting out. Do not blow it out of proportion." Emily stared at him, unblinking. "Bear Larkin is not a kid." Hayes stopped tapping his pen. For the first time in a long while, he lifted his eyes and kept them on someone. "You are accusing people without evidence. I cannot." "You can," Emily cut in. "And you will." Hayes leaned back, trying to look authoritative. "Who do you think you are walking in here giving me orders? This is not your military base." Emily did not flinch. "I know exactly this is not a base, because if it were, you would have been removed for incompetence." Color rose in Hayes's face. But before he could snap, Emily continued, her voice low and sharp as polished steel. "Last night, someone followed me home. They sprayed a threat across my garage. It happened minutes after I left Timberjack's. You know who did it. And you know why they felt bold enough to do it." "You cannot prove anything," Hayes muttered, but the lack of confidence in his tone gave him away. Emily braced one hand on the edge of his desk and leaned in slightly, lowering her voice so only he could hear. "I do not need to prove anything. I only need to understand." She spoke each word with precise, cutting clarity. "Understand who you are protecting. Understand who you owe. Understand where the money comes from. And most importantly, understand exactly what you are afraid of." Hayes swallowed hard. He did not intend to let his hand tremble, but the pen slipped from his fingers and clattered onto the desk. Emily straightened. "I did not come here asking for your help. I came so you would know one thing." She turned toward the door. Just before stepping out, she paused. Without looking back, her voice cut through the room like a blade sliding across metal. "When I deal with Bear, I want you to remember I gave you the chance to do the right thing." The door closed behind her with a soft sound that felt as heavy as a sentence being passed. Hayes sat frozen in his chair, sweat gathering at the back of his neck. For the first time in years, he felt like a man standing at the edge of a cliff. And it was not because of Bear. It was because of the woman who had just walked out of his office, the woman he had misjudged completely. Emily walked out of the sheriff's station with a calm expression, but inside her, a thin, taut wire had begun to vibrate. The conversation with Hayes had brought no assistance, but she had never gone there for help. She had gone to probe. And Hayes's reactions had revealed more than any official report ever could. The unease, the strained voice, the evasive eyes. He knew something. Or worse, he was entangled far deeper than she had suspected. Bear was not acting alone, and the red paint dripping down her garage door had not been the impulse of a drunken thug. It was a message, a symbol of the power Bear believed he wielded, power Hayes quietly allowed to grow. The two men were connected, and Emily understood this much. If one end of the rope struck at her, the other end would not remain still. The morning wind swept through Red Rock's main street, carrying the scent of fresh-cut pine from the northern mill. Emily got into her car, closed the door, buckled her seatbelt, then sat still for several seconds. She let the silence clear her thoughts the way she once did during missions where explosions could erupt from any direction. In that silence, the equation sharpened. Bear was escalating. Hayes was complicit, and the Veterans Center, a refuge for people still learning to stand after their losses, could be the next target. She turned the car around and headed toward it. As she approached, the old brick building emerged under the pale sunlight, its sign, Red Rock Veterans House, swaying gently in the breeze. A few old pickup trucks stood outside. This place was home for many. A mental fortress Emily had built piece by piece through conversations, handshakes, and long nights helping veterans haunted by nightmares. Marcus stood in the yard pulling a heavy sandbag for the strength recovery group. His arm still showed a bruise from last month's motorcycle fall, yet his movements were steady, masking the power beneath. When he saw Emily's car, he smiled broadly, the smile of someone welcoming a familiar, comforting presence. "I was thinking you'd be late," he said, lowering the bag and wiping his forehead with his sleeve. "Not today," Emily replied. Marcus studied her face more closely, his brows tightening. "You look more tense than usual. Something happened last night," she said, her tone calm but edged with steel. "Bear related," Marcus lowered his voice. Emily did not need to nod. The silence between them answered for her. Marcus gripped the sandbag strap. "I heard some guys at the gas station talking. He's been bragging all morning. Said he's going to teach someone a lesson." "Everyone knows he means you." He paused, then asked directly, "Are you scared?" Emily looked straight into his eyes. "Marcus, I've been in places where breathing half a second late could get you killed. I'm not afraid of a man who screams to hide how weak he is." Marcus let out a short laugh, not from amusement, but from respect. "You always say things that freeze people in place." The center's front door opened, and Sarah, a 34-year-old former Army nurse, walked over carrying 2 cups of hot coffee. She handed one to Emily. "I heard your car. I figured it was you." Sarah's voice softened with concern. "Are you all right?" Emily accepted the cup, feeling the warmth spread through her fingers. "I'm fine, but we need to be more careful from now on." Sarah glanced at Marcus, then around the yard, lowering her voice. "You think they'll come here?" "Not think," Emily said. "No." Both fell silent. The morning sun reflected on the glass entrance, forming the faint silhouette of the 3 of them standing together. 3 people with 3 pasts and 3 wounds. But Emily felt something stronger than ever. None of them stood alone anymore. And that was what made Bear dangerous. But it was also what made him beatable. Marcus's voice came out low and rough. "If they come here, they'll have to go through the whole group. We might not be on the battlefield anymore, but I still know how to defend home." "No," Emily said instantly. "No fighting. No violence. We won't walk into the trap Bear wants." Marcus clenched his jaw. "Then what, Emily?" "We just sit and wait for him to strike." Emily turned her eyes toward the main road. A cold gust drifted from the distant mountains. In that moment, her gaze darkened, deep and sharp like the blade she once carried on raids. "I'll take the initiative," she said, "and I won't let him lay a hand on any of you." Sarah hesitated, then asked quietly, "Where will you start?" Emily took a sip of coffee, the bitterness spreading slowly across her tongue. She looked into the distance as if she could already see the fate of Red Rock unfolding. "I'll track Bear," she said. "Not to fight him, to learn what he's truly hiding. Once I know the truth, they'll fall." Marcus watched her for a long moment, then offered a small, hopeful smile, the smile of someone who saw light where others only saw shadows. Then Emily. "We're with you." Emily shook her head, half smiling, half serious. "You'll be with me when the time comes, but for now, I have something I need to do alone." The morning wind carried a chill of warning. The Veterans Center stood in the soft sunlight, but Emily knew the truth: a storm was gathering on the horizon. A storm Bear believed he controlled, but in reality, the eye of that storm was her. After leaving the Veterans Center, Emily drove down the narrow roads leading toward the outskirts of Red Rock. The sky had grown clearer, but inside her, a thin layer of clouds was gathering. Not from fear, but from a razor-sharp instinct, warning her that they would not wait long. Men like Bear always struck the moment their pride was hit where it hurt most. And last night, Emily had not just struck, she had shattered the very thing he built his identity on. She drove past the old industrial zone on the west side of town, where a meatpacking plant had once operated before being abandoned years ago. From a tactical standpoint, it was the perfect place for gatherings no one wanted seen. And just as she expected, a few dusty pickup trucks and a dark sedan with black-tinted windows sat parked in the shadows of the warehouse row. Emily did not stop near them. She merely glanced over like any passerby would. But she logged everything: license plates, positions, the man leaning on the hood, the wind direction, the distance from the back door to the metal fence. Small details, meaningless to most, but to her they formed a map, a survival layout, and a counterattack plan. As she made a turn, Emily spotted a bright red Harley slicing around a corner in the distance. She recognized the rider instantly. Leo Briggs Bear's young enforcer, always around to clean up the mess. Impulsive, impatient, blindly loyal. She watched him disappear over the hill, and her decision came quickly. Today she would follow him. Emily kept a steady distance, moving like she once did on night patrols in enemy territory. The Harley led her through winding streets into the eastern outskirts, where run-down shacks sat scattered among empty lots and piles of scrap metal. Leo stopped his bike in front of a dilapidated wooden house, its roof sagging, its windows patched with old boards. He looked around, saw no one, then slung a heavy burlap sack off his shoulder. Whatever was inside was exactly what Bear did not want seen, and if her instincts were right, it was a critical piece in the puzzle Hayes had desperately tried to hide. Emily parked her car over 50 meters away and shut the engine. She got out swiftly, moving along the fence line, letting the tall weeds cover her silhouette. Her breathing was slow, controlled, as if her body had slipped back into the tactical state she had lived in for years. She was not tense. She was doing something more familiar than everyday life. Leo entered the house. The wooden door creaked. Emily pressed herself against the back wall of the structure, peering through a crack in the boards. What she saw made her eyes turn cold. Inside were 3 men sitting around a table, none of them bikers. No leather jackets, no steel-toe boots. They looked like regular laborers, but their posture said otherwise. Straight backs, eyes, scanning, deliberately avoiding eye contact with each other, the signature behavior of criminals trying to appear calm. Leo dropped the sack on the table. One of the men opened it. Emily saw neatly packaged bags of white powder under the dim bulb. This was not low-grade street narcotics. The packaging was far too professional. The ridge wolves did not produce anything like this. Someone bigger was supplying Bear. Leo said something, but Emily could only catch fragments through the rotted wood. Tonight. Delivery last batch. One of the men handed Leo a thick envelope, which he stuffed quickly inside his jacket. Emily stepped back from the crack and slipped into the shadows. Her thoughts sharpened. Everything was becoming clearer. Bear was not just a violent biker. He was a link in a chain, a small piece in a larger operation, and he was not protecting Bear because of some personal connection. He was being paid to protect him. Bear was just the errand boy. At that moment, Emily heard the door open. Leo stepped out, zipped up his jacket, and touched the envelope reflexively. He scanned the area, narrowing his eyes against the light. Emily held her breath and sank deeper into the darkness. Leo stepped off the porch, but the moment he turned toward his Harley, he froze. He stood still for a few seconds, his body tightening like a hunting dog catching an unfamiliar scent. He turned his head toward the field behind the house, his gaze passing directly over where Emily crouched. She sank lower, muscles coiled. Leo squinted, looking harder, but a sudden gust of wind rustled a patch of dried leaves in the distance. He seemed to decide it was just an animal. Damn town. He muttered, then climbed onto his bike. The engine roared and the Harley shot off like an arrow. Emily waited until the sound faded completely before straightening. Her shadow stretched long across the ground, thin but unshakable, soft but unbreakable exactly, like her quiet guarded, ready to ignite if pushed. She looked at the shabby house, the place where a third faction had just revealed itself in the story Bear was desperately trying to bury. A single thought echoed in her mind. I am getting close. Very close. She returned to her car, started the engine, and headed back toward Red Rock. The sunlight had climbed higher, striking the rusted signs of the abandoned industrial zone. And in that light, Emily saw something unmistakable. This confrontation was no longer between Emily and Bear. It was between Emily and an entire network of corrupted power feeding on Red Rock like a parasite. And if she had to face that entire network, she would still keep moving forward, one step, deeper and deeper. Emily returned to town as the sun climbed higher, its light slicing through the remnants of morning fog and settling over the wooden rooftops of Red Rock like a thin layer of gold, beautiful but not warm enough. She drove toward the Veterans Center, but she did not pull in. Instead, she stopped in the empty lot at the end of the street, a place she often went when she needed to think without interruption. The wind carried the scent of the lake from the west, but the peacefulness could not soften the conclusions she had just pieced together. Bear was not acting alone. Someone supplied the product. Someone delivered the money. Someone protected him. And Hayes, with the sheriff's seat he clung to at any cost, had almost certainly received something valuable enough to ignore everything happening under his name. Red Rock did not simply have a troublemaking biker gang. Beneath the surface was a small, tightly run criminal operation, far more organized than anyone in town could imagine. Emily placed her hands on the steering wheel, her fingers tightening. She had dismantled networks far bigger than this in Afghanistan, where every decision could lead to an explosion or a burst of gunfire. But in Red Rock, the enemy wore familiar faces. The guy at the gas station, the construction worker on the corner, the smiling morning deputy at the station. People everyone called neighbors. Betrayal was always easier to swallow when it came from strangers. When it stood in your own town, it became something far more bitter. Suddenly, her phone buzzed. A message from Sarah Marcus is hurt. Come back now. Nothing more. No explanation. No punctuation. Just 6 words sharp enough to make Emily press the accelerator until the tires screeched across the gravel like metal scraping metal. When she arrived, the center's front door was wide open. Sarah stood on the porch, her face pale fear shining behind her attempt at composure. Marcus sat on the ground with his back against the wall, dust covering his jacket, and a deep bruise running from his shoulder to his side. Emily rushed to him, kneeling. "What happened?" He breathed heavily, forcing himself to speak through the pain. "3 guys, not bikers' masks, ambushed me in the alley behind the repair shop," Sarah added in a trembling voice. "They didn't say anything. No verbal threats. But they beat Marcus and left a message for you." Emily turned to her. "What message?" Sarah handed her a crumpled piece of paper, the kind someone had balled up in anger. Emily unfolded it. 1 sentence. "Stop or we burn this place first." Emily shot to her feet, her breath turning cold. She looked around the center's small yard. The old building built from gray brick 10 years earlier, the aging windows, the uneven grass, the wooden benches repaired by the veterans' own hands. A modest place. A fragile place. A place that did not deserve to be threatened. Yet here it was marked as if it were the heart of a war zone. "They know you're digging," Marcus said hoarsely, "and they want you to back off." Emily crouched again and met his eyes. "They went after you before they even touched me." Marcus gave a strained smile. "Because you scared them? I'm just a warning shot." Sarah's hands tightened. "Emily, this is beyond serious now." Emily did not answer immediately. She glanced toward the street. A small pickup truck slowed as it passed by the driver, staring toward the center. When their eyes met, the truck accelerated abruptly and vanished. Not a local. Not how Red Rock residents reacted to trouble. This was how watchers assessed a target. Emily inhaled deeply, then spoke with a voice as cold as steel. "They aren't just threatening us. They're testing me." Sarah stepped closer. "So what are you planning to do?" Emily did not respond with words. Instead, she looked at the people gathering behind her, Marcus struggling to stand with his uninjured arm, 2 older veterans hurrying out from the building, others peeking through the curtains, with fear etched across their faces. They had all faced war, pain, and loss, but no one ever got used to being threatened in their own hometown. Emily knew she could not remain silent or continue investigating alone. Call everyone, she said, every veteran, everyone still connected to this center. Sarah blinked. Right now. Right now. Within minutes, roughly 20 people gathered in the common room, faces that had once been comrades, soldiers, men and women carrying scars on their bodies and deeper ones in their minds. They all stared at Emily with the same mixture of worry, anger, and anticipation. Emily stood before them with no notes, no speech. Just herself, the person who had helped them rise when they nearly collapsed. They attacked Marcus. She said, her voice steady, but heavy as lead. "They threatened to burn down our center, and they did it because I refused to look away from what's happening in Red Rock." From the back of the room, Marcus spoke, voice rough but clear. "Not because of her, because of all of us, because of this whole town." Emily nodded. "Exactly. Which means we are no longer bystanders in this story. We are targets. But we are also the only shield standing between them and the innocent people in this town." Not a whisper, not a shifting foot. Every eye stayed on her. Emily continued. "You think Bear is the most dangerous man here?" She shook her head. No, he's a tool. There's a bigger group behind him. Last night I saw them trading narcotics with 3 men who were not bikers. That was no small deal. That was a pipeline. And I believe Hayes knows all about it. A wave of anger rippled across the room. Sarah clenched her jaw. Then why don't we call the FBI? Emily exhaled slowly, weighing her words. Because we don't have enough evidence yet. Just observations. Blurry images in the dark won't bring down an organization. So what do we do? Marcus asked. I'll tell you, Emily said. Her eyes lit with a fire that caught in the air around her. We are not going to brawl, but we are going to fight, in a way Bear cannot beat. She stepped forward, placed a black canvas bag on the table, and unzipped it. Inside were not guns, not knives, but small cameras tracking devices, microphones, infrared flashlights, and covert equipment. The room seemed to hold its breath. Tonight, Emily said, we begin. I need evidence. Faces, license plates, patterns, routes, everything they cannot talk their way out of when the FBI sees it. Marcus's eyes brightened with a spark he had not shown in months. You want us to be scouts. No, Emily corrected. I want us to become a unit. An older veteran stood voice firm. Like the old days. Emily looked at him then at the entire room. Not the old days, today, and for Red Rock. A chorus answered as one for Red Rock. And in that brief electric moment, Emily knew she was no longer fighting alone. She had just built something Bear could never have imagined. An army, not to kill, but to expose the truth, and to end the nightmare suffocating Red Rock. Emily stood in the Veterans Center common room, surrounded by 20 people who looked at her as if she had just lit a lantern inside a suffocating darkness. But she knew the hardest part had not come yet. What she was about to do required more than courage. It required precision, the kind where one mistake could shatter the entire operation or cost someone their life. After the meeting, the tension in the room slowly eased as the veterans scattered to prepare for the night. Sarah packed the equipment into bags. Marcus sat on a bench reviewing the maps and the handwritten notes Emily had laid out. Emily stepped onto the porch, drawing in a long breath of the chilly afternoon air. The sun had shifted toward the west, its pale gold stretching across the cracked road, casting long, thin shadows of the tall pines. But that piece was nothing more than thin paper laid over the unrest simmering beneath the town. She knew tonight was the beginning. The beginning of a plan built from years of experience, from missions where maps were vague suggestions and survival depended on nothing but observation and instinct. This time, the battlefield was not some foreign land. It was Red Rock, her home, which made everything far more dangerous. Marcus stepped out beside her, holding a bottle of water and wincing as the bruise on his shoulder flared. You think we're going to run into trouble tonight? Emily looked at him. Not if we do everything right. And if we don't? Emily glanced toward the group, preparing behind him old George, 63 years old, testing the tiny camera clipped to his hat. Jenny taping backup batteries to the inside of her jacket. Sarah showing 2 older vets how to operate the recording devices. Then we pay a price. But I won't let that happen. Marcus lifted his head, a familiar spark lighting in his eyes, the kind she had seen in photos of the young soldier he once was. What about you? Where will you be? Emily narrowed her eyes toward the distant hills. I'll be going inside where Bear's den. Marcus's breath hitched. You're going alone? Yes. Emily, that's suicide. Not if I know the way out. He started to argue, but the look in Emily's eyes, the same one that had made Bear hesitate for a fraction of a second, silenced him. Not out of fear, but because he understood she had decided. And once Emily Walker made a decision, no one could change it. Evening crept in. As the shadows lengthened and the streetlights flickered to life, the veterans dispersed according to Emily's plan. They moved quietly like silhouettes accustomed to blending into darkness. Each had a placement. Each had a mission. No shouting, no foot dragging, only slow breaths and unwavering focus. The Veterans Center, once a peaceful refuge, had become a temporary command post. Maps spread across the table, tracking devices beside small radios. Sarah monitored the feed from the miniature cameras. Jenny stood at the window with a thermal binocular watching movement outside. Marcus stood behind Emily, arms crossed, worry and pride tangled in his gaze. Emily placed a hand on his shoulder. "I'm going." Emily Marcus swallowed hard. "If something happens, nothing will happen," she cut in. "I'll return with evidence, and when I do, we won't just take Bear down. We'll take down whoever is backing him." "You're sure Hayes is involved?" Marcus asked. Emily stared at the door, her voice low and sharp. "I'm not guessing. I know." She left the center and walked into the darkness, settling over Red Rock. Night wrapped around everything like a thick veil, but to Emily, darkness was not an enemy. It was an ally. She drove toward the industrial zone, the place where she had tailed Leo Briggs. As she approached, she switched off her headlights and slowed the car until it glided forward like a shadow. Familiar sounds returned: the roar of motorcycles in the distance, bottles clinking from a nearby abandoned house, drunken laughter echoing between metal walls. Together they formed the soundscape of a place no one entered without purpose. Near the old Ridgewolves warehouse, Emily parked. She pulled a black hood over her head, clipped a mini camera to her jacket lapel, and stepped out softly enough that the ground barely registered her presence. Under the flickering neon sign, the warehouse looked like an aging beast, ragged, but still dangerous. The metal door hung slightly open, leaking strips of yellow light. Inside, she heard Bear yelling at someone, his voice hammering through the space. "We're teaching her a lesson. That girl needs to know who actually runs this town." Emily pressed herself against the wall, moving inch by inch, listening. Inside were at least 8 men. Bear stood in the middle chest, puffed with false authority, his eyes glassy from alcohol. "Those 2 idiots who roughed up Marcus, they went too far," one biker muttered. "Too far," Bear barked. "What do you mean, too far? They did exactly what I wanted. Anyone tied to that girl needs to back off." Emily froze, a cold rush spreading down her spine. Bear already knew Marcus was part of her circle. He had not attacked Marcus to warn her. He attacked him to break her support one person at a time. "And listen up," Bear continued, voice turning sharp and cruel. "Tonight won't stop there. Tonight we send her something bigger." The room fell silent. One biker spoke softly. "You mean that center?" Bear grinned, wide and vicious. "As long as she keeps sticking her claws where she shouldn't, we burn the place she loves first." The hair on Emily's neck rose, as if struck by electricity. This was not a threat. It was a plan. She could not let the veterans be attacked. She could not let the center, the sanctuary, helping broken soldiers rebuild their lives, be reduced to ashes because of Bear's wounded pride. She had to end this. Now. Emily checked the camera on her jacket. She inhaled, then recorded Bear's face, his voice, and every incriminating word. But then behind her she heard a sound, a small scrape, a pebble rolling across concrete. Emily spun instantly, reflex born from years of survival, but too late. A hand as strong as an iron clamp seized her shoulder and yanked hard. Before she could counter, a familiar voice hissed against her ear, low, venomous, dripping with hatred. "Well, look who we've got." The girl who made Bear lose face. Emily's back slammed against the metal wall, her arm pinned. Her muscles tightening into defense. The man behind her was Leo Briggs. He leaned close, his breath hot against her cheek. And he whispered just loud enough for her to hear, "Tonight, you didn't come here to spy. You came here to die." When we look back at the entire story, one truth becomes unmistakably clear. Real strength does not come from muscle or loud voices. It comes from the calm resolve of someone who knows exactly what they are protecting. Emily did not fight for revenge. She fought to safeguard a community that seemed fragile on the surface, but carried remarkable resilience beneath. And it was that unwavering determination that shook an entire hidden network of power once believed to be unbreakable. If you believe that stories about courage and justice deserve to be told and remembered, make sure to like and subscribe so you will not miss the next chapter. And before you leave this video, share a short comment. No more than 3 words, as a promise we all share. Together. Stay strong now.